When most people think about cars worth more than a Ferrari, they picture something Italian, something exotic, something built for millionaires in a factory in Maranello with a prancing horse on the hood. Nobody thinks of Plymouth. Plymouth built family cars, station wagons, economy sedans, cars for working people who needed reliable transportation and couldn't afford to be flashy about it. And yet, on January 17, 2026, a Plymouth sold at auction for $3.3 million. $3.3 million. For context, that's more than a new Ferrari SF90 Stradale, more than a new Lamborghini Revuelto, more than most vintage Ferraris from the same era. This was a 1971 Plymouth Barracuda, a car that cost roughly $4,000 new, a car that Plymouth advertised with the same budget muscle car language they used for the Roadrunner and the Duster. Today, I'm going to tell you exactly how this happened, and I'm going to answer the question that's been sitting in the collector car world for the last decade. Are Plymouth Hemi cars genuinely worth more than Ferraris? Or is this just auction fever? By the end of this video, you'll have the real answer, and I think it's going to surprise you. The engine that started everything. NASCAR, 1964. To understand why a Plymouth is worth more than a Ferrari, you have to start where the story actually begins, not in a showroom, but on a racetrack. In January 1964, Chrysler showed up to the Daytona 500 with something nobody had seen before. A new engine, 7 liters of displacement, hemispherical combustion chambers, a design borrowed from aircraft engines, where the dome-shaped chamber creates superior thermal efficiency, larger valve openings, and better breathing than a conventional wedge head design. They called it the 426 Hemi. The racing world called it the elephant motor, partly for its enormous size and 843-pound dry weight, partly for its sheer brute strength. At the 1964 Daytona 500, the top 4 finishing positions were all occupied by Hemi-powered Plymouths and Dodges. Richard Petty won the race outright. His teammates filled out the podium. Ford, which had been dominating NASCAR, was humiliated. NASCAR's response was immediate. The 426 Hemi was banned from competition for the 1965 season. The official reasoning was that it wasn't available in a production street car. The real reasoning was that nobody else could compete with it. So Chrysler faced a choice: accept the ban and walk away from NASCAR, or build enough street versions of the Hemi to satisfy the homologation rules and come back to racing. They chose to fight. In 1965, while sitting out NASCAR, Chrysler engineers spent the year developing a detuned, street-legal version of the race engine. Compression ratio reduced from 12.5 to 1 down to 10.25 to 1. Hydraulic lifters replacing the solid race cam. Carter 4-barrel carburetors instead of the race setup. Cast iron heads rather than aluminum. The result retained the essential architecture of the race engine. Same bore, same stroke, same fundamental design, while becoming reliable enough to start on a cold morning and drive to work. It was rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. Chrysler built the required number of street Hemis, satisfied the homologation requirement, and came back to NASCAR in 1966. Richard Petty won the Daytona 500 that year too. That story, an engine born on a racetrack, banned for being too dominant, detuned just enough to be street legal, is the foundation of everything that follows. Street Hemi, bringing the racetrack home. The 426 Street Hemi was available from 1966 through 1971, 6 model years. And in those 6 years, Chrysler built a total of 9,778 street versions for public sale. Not 9,778 per year, 9,778 total, combined, across all 6 years, in every Plymouth and Dodge it was offered in. To put that in perspective, Ford sold roughly 9,000 Boss 302 Mustangs in 1969 alone. The entire run of 426 Street Hemis, across 6 years, barely exceeded that single-year total for a Mustang option. The reason for the low numbers comes down to cost and complexity. The Hemi wasn't cheap to build. Chrysler's own internal accounting reportedly showed they were barely breaking even, if not losing money, on each street Hemi sold. The $871 option charge on top of an already expensive performance car was a significant barrier, and the Hemi carried only a 1-year, 12,000-mile warranty, half the coverage of the regular engine options, because even Chrysler wasn't sure how long it would last under hard street use. The cars that received Hemis got special treatment on the assembly line. Heavier-duty suspension components, the best brakes available, stronger rear axle housings, wider tires. Each Hemi car took extra assembly time and extra quality checks that non-Hemi cars didn't receive. 2 Carter 4-barrel carburetors sitting in line on a cross-ram intake manifold. Forged internals throughout. The same fundamental valve train geometry that had won at Daytona. In street tune, it was rated at 425 horsepower, and independent testing consistently showed the actual output was higher. Chrysler, like almost every other manufacturer of the era, lowballed the numbers to keep insurance premiums manageable for buyers. The street Hemi was available in a remarkable range of Mopar muscle cars across those 6 years. Dodge Coronet, Charger, Super B, Challenger, and Plymouth Satellite, Roadrunner, GTX, and Barracuda. Each model had different production numbers, but across all of them, the Hemi option was always the rarest, most expensive, most demanding choice on the order sheet. After 1971, it was gone. Not updated, not renamed. Gone. The tightening emissions regulations, combined with the insurance industry's systematic targeting of high-horsepower engines, made continued production economically indefensible. The 426 Street Hemi was discontinued, and it has never returned in original form. The Cuda, Plymouth's perfect Hemi package. Of all the cars that received the 426 Street Hemi, one stands above the rest in the collector market. The Plymouth Barracuda Cuda. Here's why. For 1970, Plymouth completely redesigned the Barracuda. The new car moved off the A-body Valiant platform it had shared since 1964 onto the all-new Chrysler E-body, a shorter, wider, lower platform developed specifically for pony car applications. The result was arguably the most aggressive-looking American car of the entire muscle car era. A broad, muscular stance, short deck, long hood, flared wheel openings, and for 1970, a standard feature that became the car's most iconic visual element, the N97 air grabber hood, which fans called the Shaker. An engine-mounted scoop that protruded through a hole in the hood and visibly shook with the engine's vibrations. When the driver activated the flapper on the Shaker scoop from inside the car, cold outside air dumped directly into the carburetor. The E-body package was lighter and more agile than the B-body cars like the Roadrunner and Charger. Combined with the 426 Hemi, the result was a car that could run legitimate low 13-second quarter miles in stock form, faster than the heavier Charger with the same engine. Now the production numbers that matter. In 1970, Plymouth built 666 Hemi Cuda coupes and 14 Hemi Cuda convertibles. 14 for the entire year. In 1971, the numbers got even smaller. 107 Hemi Cuda coupes and 7 Hemi Cuda convertibles. 7 drop tops in the final year of Hemi production. These 7 cars are among the rarest factory muscle cars ever built. Total Hemi Cuda production across both years, 794 cars. Spread over the entire world, more than 55 years of time, and the inevitable attrition of decades of ownership. The Cuda was never cheap, even new. By the time you added the Hemi option, the mandatory heavy-duty components, and a few comfort items, you were approaching $5,000 for a 1970 model, in an era when the average American family earned around $9,800 per year. The people who bought Hemi Cudas in 1970 were making a significant financial commitment, and most of them drove those cars hard. Why, they were driven hard and nearly destroyed. Here's what separates the Hemi Cuda story from most collector car narratives. These cars weren't bought as investments. They weren't tucked away in climate-controlled garages by wealthy enthusiasts who understood what they had. They were bought by young Americans in their 20s and 30s who wanted the fastest car money could buy. And those buyers did exactly what you'd expect. They drove them, hard, on the street, on the drag strip, through winters, through rust, through modifications that made sense in 1972 but destroyed provenance in 2022. Engine swaps were common. When a Hemi needed expensive repairs in the 1970s and 1980s, many owners simply pulled the engine and replaced it with a cheaper 440 or 383. The body stayed. The documentation often disappeared. The matching numbers drivetrain, the thing that separates a $230,000 Hemi coupe from a $40,000 tribute car today, was gone. Fires, accidents, rust, floods, all of the normal attrition that any production car faces over 5 decades worked against these cars too. But the Hemi Cudas faced an additional problem. Their value wasn't widely understood until it was too late to save many of them. The cars that survived with original Hemi drivetrains, original documentation, and unmodified bodies are genuinely rare in a way that no production numbers alone can convey. Of the 21 Hemi convertibles ever built, the number of confirmed survivors with their original drivetrain is believed to be in the low single digits for the 1971 model year. That's the real supply constraint. Not 21 cars, not even 7 cars, single digits. And single digits, at the intersection of documented American automotive history, create prices that compete directly with the most desirable exotics ever built. The auction floor, $3.3 million, and the full market. Let's look at what the auction market has actually done with these cars, because the price trajectory is one of the most dramatic in all of collector car history. The record for any Hemi Cuda, any body style, now stands at $3,300,000. That was a 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda sold on January 17, 2026 at auction. The most money ever paid for any Barracuda at public auction by a substantial margin. But the story leading up to that number tells you as much as the number itself. In June 2019, a lemon twist yellow 1970 Hemi Cuda convertible sold for approximately $1.95 million. Well over 7 figures for what was, in effect, one of 9 surviving Hemi automatic convertibles from 1970. Just 6 months later, that same car appeared at auction again and sold for $2.3 million. The same car. 6 months. $350,000 gain. At Mecum's Indy 2021 auction, a Hemi Cuda convertible attracted bidding that reached $4.8 million before the seller pulled it. The reserve wasn't met, but the fact that bidding reached $4.8 million on a car that didn't sell tells you exactly where serious collector demand sits. For the hardtop coupes, which are more common but still scarce, the market has been equally clear. At Mecum's Kissimmee 2025, a Tor Red Hemi Cuda with a factory gator grain vinyl top, one of the rarer options combinations, sold for $522,500. A regular 1970 Hemi Cuda crossed the Barrett-Jackson block in January 2025 and sold for $605,000. According to Classic.com's comprehensive auction tracking, the average sale price for a third-generation Plymouth Hemi Cuda across all documented sales now stands at $413,959. The floor, the lowest recent recorded sale, was $116,000 in March 2024, and the ceiling, as of January 2026, is $3.3 million. The lowest recorded sale was $116,000. Let that register for a moment. The least expensive confirmed Hemi Cuda to sell at public auction in the last 2 years brought $116,000. That's the entry point. The Ferrari comparison. What the data actually shows. Now let's address the title directly. Are Plymouth Hemi cars actually worth more than Ferraris? The answer depends on which Ferrari you're comparing. A new Ferrari SF90 Stradale, Ferrari's current hybrid V8 flagship, starts at around $507,000. The Hemi Cuda's record of $3.3 million more than sextuples that figure. But a new Ferrari isn't a fair comparison. The prancing horse's iconic racing Ferraris from the 1960s, GTO, Lusso, 275 GTB/4, sell for tens of millions. On pure price, the Hemi Cuda doesn't compete at the very top of the Ferrari market. But here's where the comparison becomes genuinely interesting, and where the title of this video earns its claim: appreciation rate, the speed at which these cars have gained value. According to collector car market analysis from Hot Cars, published in March 2026, the Hemi Cuda has been outpacing many Ferrari models in appreciation rate over the last decade. Not in absolute price, but in percentage gain. A Hemi Cuda convertible that was worth $500,000 in 2014 is now a $2 to $3 million car. That's a 400 to 600% gain in roughly 12 years. Many vintage Ferraris from the same era, the Dino 246, the 308 GTB, even some Testarossas, have appreciated, but not at that rate. There's also a philosophical dimension to this comparison that the collector market has begun to recognize. Ferrari built its reputation on exclusivity, engineering excellence, and racing heritage. The Hemi Cuda has all three, just wrapped in American sheet metal. The 426 Hemi won at Daytona. It was banned for being too dominant. Its street version is genuinely rare. And the Cuda body that houses it is, by any objective standard, one of the most beautiful American car designs ever produced. What the Hemi Cuda doesn't have is the Ferrari brand mystique and the decades of careful market positioning that comes with it. But the cars themselves? The engineering story, the racing pedigree, the scarcity, the visual drama, it's all there. The collector market has been figuring this out one auction at a time. Should you buy one? Honest verdict. So where does this leave a collector in 2026 who wants a piece of this story? Let me be completely direct. If you're looking for a genuine, numbers-matching, documented Hemi Cuda convertible, you need to be prepared to spend between $1.5 and $3 million. At that level, you're not buying a car, you're buying a piece of documented American automotive history, and the price is going to keep reflecting that. For the Hemi Coupe, more options, more supply. A well-documented, numbers-matching example in good condition is realistically a $200,000 to $600,000 purchase, depending on options, color, and provenance. That's still significant money, but it's accessible to a different tier of collector than the convertible. Here's my most important warning, and it's specific to this car. The Hemi Cuda tribute car problem is real. Because the values are so extreme, there are significant financial incentives to build convincing fakes. A 383 Cuda or 440 Cuda with a swapped Hemi engine, cloned VIN, and fabricated paperwork can fool casual buyers. Before spending six figures on any Hemi Cuda, get documentation verified by a recognized Mopar authenticator. Frank Badalson, who maintains the Hemi registry, is the accepted authority for first-generation E-body Hemi verification. Do not skip this step. For collectors who want Hemi Mopar exposure without the extreme price tag, the 446-pack Cuda, available in both 1970 and 1971, is the logical alternative. Similar visual package, similar performance in real-world driving, documented production numbers in the thousands rather than hundreds, and trading in the $60,000 to $120,000 range for well-preserved examples. Not the same investment case, but the same car, with a different engine, and a price that's actually reachable. The Plymouth Hemi Cuda started as a car for Americans who wanted the fastest thing money could buy in 1970. It wasn't built for museums. It wasn't built for investment portfolios. It was built to win. And 55 years later, it's still winning, this time on the auction floor, against cars from Maranello that cost 10 times as much to produce. Now I want to hear from you. If you had the budget for either a genuine numbers-matching Hemi Cuda coupe or a vintage Ferrari from the same era, which one do you choose? And why? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if this debate is as heated in the comments as I think it's going to be, I might make a follow-up video specifically on that comparison. If you've been watching this series, we've now covered the Buick GSX, the Pontiac Judge, 5 muscle cars that doubled since 2020, the Super Bee, the Camaro Z28, the Chevelle LS6, and now the Hemi Cuda. Next week, we're going to change direction slightly. Instead of looking at cars already worth hundreds of thousands, I'm going to show you 5 muscle cars still under $30,000 that I believe will be on this same list in 5 years. Subscribe so you don't miss it. See you next week.